seriously, these tarpon are rolling at, 15 feet from your boat. So you do not have to be a good angler at all in order to catch tarpon out there. And that's why I say this is the perfect place to take the intimidation out of tarpon fishing. So, and I personally am a fan of the Real Flats Pro line. I love that line. But any saltwater line is going to work great. Anything that's there for warm water, you wouldn't want to use a trout line out there because, well, we all know that those lines just don't work well in.
That was Jen Ripple talking about a new tarpon fishery in Mexico. This is episode number 60 of the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today. We'll help you on your fly fishing journey with classic stories covering steelhead fishing, fly tying, and much more.
How's it going, everyone? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show. I wanted to give a quick shout out to our amazing supporters on Patreon. Head over to wetflyswing.com/Patreon. That's Patreon to get bonus content and dig a little deeper with the show. In today's episode, I interviewed Jen Ripple, the editor-in-chief of Done Magazine, a amazing fly fishing magazine with a female focus. We talk about the perfect place for your first tarpon trip, some DIY tips for heading to Mexico on your next trip, and an upcoming road trip with Heather Hodson. Jen shares her go-to piece of gear from Yeti, how she made her magazine explode, and the best time to chase tarpon. Don't miss this one as Jen tells us why she didn't start drinking until age 38 and why she hasn't stopped since. So, without further ado, here's Jen Ripple from DoneMagazine.com. How's it going, Jen?
It's going well, thanks.
Good. Great to have you on here. We've been talking for a while, and you've got some really cool stuff going on out there, including a magazine, which is pretty cool. So we're going to dig into a bunch of topics today, but I hope you can start off just telling us a little bit about how you got into fly fishing and then how you brought that up into kind of the magazine and everything.
Yeah, sure. So, I did not grow up fishing at all. I didn't fly fish until I was in my 30s. And it's kind of funny because my grandfather fished. I grew up on a lake in Wisconsin, and my brother and sister fished, not fly, but they were avid, anglers. And so I was not. I was like the black sheep of the family. And then I moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and was working at the University of Michigan. And it was a really, really cold winter. And I had broken up with my then boyfriend and was looking for something to do. And so I took a fly tying class at a fly shop that's no longer there called Colton Bay Outfitters. And honestly, I took it because it was really cheap. It was like $85 for 6 classes. And I thought, well, if I don't like it, it's not like I spent $300 on something, right? Mm-hmm. So I walked in the fly shop for my first fly tying class and absolutely fell in love with everything that is fly fishing. So I did it backwards, right? I became a fly tyer, and then during the winter, and then when the ice was off the river, the Huron River, which runs through the campus of the University of Michigan there, I just spent every day in the water after work teaching myself to cast and catch fish and learning about bugs and you name it. I was like, I know no one out there can like even imagine this, but I became obsessed, right? None of us ever become obsessed.
No,
so I just became this, I became this obsessed fool, and then moved back from Ann Arbor back to Chicago, where I had spent the vast majority of my adult life. And there was a little tiny fly shop, or more like a rod building shop, right in the little area that I lived in on my block. And they were starting fly tying classes. So I loved fly tying. So I went, and the guy that was teaching the tying class had just started a magazine called a Tight Loop magazine, which is a Midwest fly fishing magazine. And so I had been writing a blog at the time. It was not a fly fishing blog. It was completely a different topic. And he had heard about that blog and asked if I wanted to write a woman's column. And so obviously I did. And then I did that for a couple of years. And then in June of 2013, I started looking for a woman's magazine to write for. And there wasn't one. So it took me about a day to realize there was not a woman's fly fishing magazine out there, and about a day to pick a name and start contacting people to write for it. And then by September, we had our first magazine.
Just like that. So you went, and this was the digital version that you first got out there.
Right. So for 3 years, we were digital only, and we were only going to be digital. I never had any intention of doing a print magazine ever. And I started it out, and I could start it out digitally because it was inexpensive. I could reach a bigger audience. So I could do it, as like just a hobby. And then people, for 3 years, people were asking, where can I buy your magazine? Where can I buy your magazine? Are you ever going to come out with a print magazine? And so finally, after all of that time, when I realized print was not dead and people really wanted print still, and the paper quality, the recycled papers and the vegetable inks that I had been looking at were actually not affordable, but not as expensive as before, then I finally came out with the first magazine, this is our second year as a print magazine. And it's incredible to see the magazine just like explode.
Yeah.
And when people say print is dead, it really isn't, right? It's just, you have to be in a niche market now. And then that will, that magazine survives. So we've been growing like crazy since then. And, that part-time hobby that I started after our first magazine came out a year ago in spring, and it was such a success, I got in the car and I thought, oh my God, now I have to do this again. And I gave myself a full-time job, and that's what it's been ever since.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, there's a bunch of things I want to unpack there. One thing, this is kind of interesting because I've interviewed a few women so far on the show, and I'll be doing more. It's funny because I just interviewed Kate Watson last week, and I think she talked about a breakup with her boyfriend. And this is a lot of people probably don't want to hear this, but I mean, I'm actually going through a pretty tough time right now. And it's one of those things where it's like, wow, it's, talking to people and stuff. And, it's kind of cool that the last couple of women I've talked to have brought this up, and, no guys ever came across the thing. And it's kind of funny because I think it's helpful to talk to people. But anyways, I digress, I guess.
No, it's funny because you reinvent yourself during that process. And that's what I did, right? So you reinvent yourself, and it is, it's kind of like we had an article, in one of our previous print magazines, and it was a young girl from Denver whose dad had died, and he had always wanted her to go fishing with him, and she never did. And so during the grieving process of losing her dad, she found his fly fishing equipment and worked through the stages of grief with a fly rod. And I think that it's the same kind of thing. That's my experience is when I was going through that really difficult time, fly fishing was that one thing that I could go on the river by myself, work out whatever was going on in my life, and became a better person at the end of it because of it, Yeah. And so, hey, there's light at the end of the tunnel.
That's good to hear. I know, and fly fishing is one of those things. I've talked to Project Healing Waters and all sorts of people, and it's a kind of helps you get through those times. So I'm hopeful that I think it's going to help me, and just doing this show and continuing to talk to people has been helpful as well. So,
for sure.
So cool. All right. Well, let's keep on track here. So the Dun magazine, I mean, obviously it's you mentioned it, it's kind of going crazy. People are, reading it, and I mean, I'm sure there's a number of reasons why, but maybe you can explain just, for somebody that hasn't read it, kind of explain what it's about and why do you think there's so much passion, people are picking it up?
Sure. So, our tagline is to empower women, not ignore men. So, for us, I like to empower the angler. And it just so happens that our authors, 99% of them are female. So it is based towards the female audience, but it is first and foremost a fly fishing magazine. So we do have at least, I'd say, 50% of the people who read our magazine are male. And that's because the articles are great and the photos are great. And it is not a male bashing or that type of magazine in any way, because when I would go to speak and I would ask a woman's audience, I would say, well, how did you get involved in fly fishing? Was it, your brother, your dad, your son? And I'd list every male type of relationship you could have. And then I'd look around at the end of that, and I would see like 99% of the women in the room were brought into fly fishing by some male in their life, right? And so the small, the small vocal minority of men who say things like, we don't want women, on our waters, that's just such a small amount that they give the rest of the male population in fly fishing a bad name. And I didn't want to be any part of that. So we do an empowering magazine. And when I think about empowering an angler or a female angler to get out on the water or to try fly fishing, it's not stories like, the professional angler who goes to BC and catches a beautiful steelhead. Yeah, that's a great story, but that doesn't make the average everyday person think, oh, fly fishing is easy and I can do it, or easy enough to do it, right? Yeah. But if I tell the story of a woman who goes with her family to Ecuador and happens to pick up a fly rod for the first time and catches a beautiful brown trout and tells her story, that's empowering. That says, wow, this must not be as difficult as everyone says it is. And I think maybe I will try this. And so we tell the everyday angler story. We do not have, I would say 1% of our authors are professional writers. Everybody else is just the everyday person out there. Yeah. And it's, and those are stories that everyone can relate to, and it really hits home, So, and those are the stories I like to read. So that's what we publish.
That's cool. Do you have a feel for whether a good majority are people that are more beginner level, or do you think it's kind of a mix of kind of beginner all the way up to advanced and things?
It's an interesting thing because being that, the vast majority are females and, women anglers, even if they have been fishing for a very long time, I find that women still consider themselves beginners. So no matter how long they've been out there, there are very few women that I come across that say, I'm a great, I'm an expert angler, whereas I kind of find that when you go, and this is not a bashing of any kind, I think it's just a difference. When I ask the same kind of things of men, it's usually, oh, I've been fishing for 5 years, I'm an expert, Whereas women, no matter how long they've been fishing, it seems like they realize they don't know it all. They don't think they know it all. And so I would say the vast majority of the people that come to us are not professionals. They don't have an English degree. They didn't go into journalism school, and they're not professional anglers. So yeah, new to intermediate, I would say, is what the stories we tell.
Okay. And what do you think for, I'm not sure who's on your, on the staff, or on, if it's a one man show or one woman show or whatever, but is it, what is the hardest part of being the editor of the magazine?
Oh, wow. At this point, I would say the hardest part of being an editor, and it's not a one-person show. We have 8 people on staff. They're not all full-time. Yeah. But I would say that half of them are anglers and half are not. So it gives a good mix to the magazine. And I would say the hardest part is probably the advertising still at this point in the game. People are just now, I'd say within the last year, realizing that not only do women really love to fly fish, but that they are a demographic that they want to advertise to. And so I would say advertising, and I don't think that that's unusual for any magazine out there. I think that's probably still the hardest part of any magazine. Apart from the advertising side of it, I would say that deciding what articles go in the magazine is the hardest, because at the beginning it was just like, oh, yay, we have 5 articles. Good, 5 articles came in. But now we get so many articles that come in that just I want to tell every story. So choosing which ones go in which, magazine, and not having a background in journalism or publishing or anything like that is the difficult part now, I think.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's I've talked about Steve Duda a lot, but he mentioned that as his biggest challenge as well from, the Fly Fish Journal when he was there. Just, because he's got so many great, you've got people like John Gierach writing stuff for you and all the rest. It's hard. And there's plenty of great people out there that just don't get accepted, right? You're at that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So, okay. Sure. Well, we're going to get more into some of the done and some information there in the background, but I wanted to check in. I think I heard this on I think it was a podcast where we were talking about tarpon in Tabasco. And I'm not familiar with too much of tarpon or that area. Could you talk a little bit about maybe just, first how the whole process getting down there, and then, how you get into tarpon down there and what it's all about?
Yeah. So I would say maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I was contacted by a guy who wanted us to come down, the Department of Tourism for Tobasco or Villahermosa brought us down there. They contacted us and said, hey, we have this fishery and we don't know if it's a viable fishery. We are an oil town and oil is going out of Villahermosa and we really want to be more conservation minded. And we have this river system that has all these fish in it. And we thought maybe you could come down and fish and see if you think this could be a destination place. And so when I hear, so I contacted the son. It's a father and a son who guide, and they're the only ones that have the permission to guide in this river system in Mexico. So Tabasco is in Mexico. And so when I started talking to him, he said, because I didn't even know at the beginning what fish were down there. And he said, they're tarpon. And he said, and there's thousands of them everywhere. And I thought, he's like, it's the best tarpon fishing ever. And I thought, oh, okay, great. I've heard this before. I've fished in Isle Morada. I know. What does that mean? You're going to see five, you're going to have a chance at maybe 5 fish a day, right? Okay, well, that's cool, whatever. And I thought, well, if there are tarpon down there, hey, they're paying for us to come down and take a look at this and we'll give them our honest opinion. So we flew down on the dime of the tourism board there and we get out into this river system and it really is it looks like the Everglades. So this is a juvenile tarpon fishery and you go out into this really long river system. It's the second longest river in Mexico and it empties from, the ocean right into this river system. And you go into this brackish water area and we take these boats up there, these little skiffs up there, and we stop. And you know how you're on the front of a flats boat and you're just kind of getting your line out there. So you pull off all your line and you make a cast and you strip it all back in so that you're all ready, when the fish comes, so you don't tangle. Well, I do that. I cast my line out and immediately a tarpon grabs my fly.
Wow.
And so within 1 minute, I have a tarpon on and the guy in the back of the boat also has a tarpon on. Jeez. We have double tarpon on in the boat. And now these aren't huge. You can catch anything. I've caught 6-inch tarpon out of there, and there have been 100-pounders that have been pulled out of there. And it's crazy. They love to eat flies because they haven't seen them. And it has such little fishing pressure because you're not having, 15 guides out there all day long.
Right.
But if it is so much fun, it is literally like when I show a video that's out there, and it's a woman who's stripping in, she's catching a tarpon and she's landing this tarpon in this, it's just a small tarpon, maybe, 15 pounds. And as she's landing it, tarpon are jumping and circling in the background right behind the boat. And you're like, this never happens. I thought I must be in fly fishing twilight zone. It's the most incredible tarpon fishing that I have ever done. It's so much fun. And then on top of that, they have huge snook in there and all different types. They don't have bonefish and permit, but if you like tarpon and snook, this is the place.
Oh, wow. That's cool. And is this so the river fishing, I guess it's a little bit different than if you're fishing, say, out in the Bahamas or some other place around where it's a big tarpon capital.
Right. Yeah. So it's not flats fishing. It is sight fishing because only in the sense that you see them at the surface. They're rolling all over. You know where they're going to be. So you're casting to this fish that just rolled up on top of the water. Right. But you can also fish. It can be like where you would drop it, use a heavy sink line and strip it along the bottom. Blind fishing, you would do it that way as well. That's where the bigger guys are. Yep. But it is the absolute perfect place if you have never caught a tarpon, if tarpon intimidate you, if you want to practice, to catch tarpon on the flats eventually. It's the perfect place because you will catch 20, 30 tarpon a day easily. Wow. Even as beginner. My first hosted trip that I did down there after I went there was with 8 women. Only one had fished saltwater. None had ever caught a tarpon. And I would say 6 out of the 8 could not double haul. Yep. And they all caught tarpon after tarpon after tarpon. In fact, 2 of the girls said, well, I had stuck a bottle of tequila in every boat and said, okay, when you catch a fish, you get to take a shot of tequila. So about halfway through the first day, I roll up on this boat and I say, so how you guys doing? And they said, we've caught so many fish that we only take a shot of tequila now when we miss a fish. Damn. Which is unheard of when you talk about tarpon.
Wow. So it's a little bit different than some of the other areas, but basically there's a lot of action. And with your fly, are you still, is it as critical to, I guess, twitch it or do the movement thing, or is it pretty much you just get it out there and then they're going for it?
It depends. Sometimes they'll just go right after it as soon as it hits the water, but you still have to make a good presentation. You can't just lop something out there and just expect that it's going to go at it like a bass. It's still a tarpon, even though it's a juvenile tarpon. And to give you an idea of where this is, everyone knows where Campeche is. This is right directly before you get to Campeche. So the fish that used to be in the Campeche area, the juvenile tarpon fishery where everyone would go to fish for tarpon those tarpon, I would bet, have migrated into this section now. And that's why this is so full of tarpon.
Oh, wow.
And I'm talking hundreds of tarpon. You'll see them everywhere. They're just everywhere.
Cool. And I'll have links to some of the stuff we're talking about at wetflyswing.com/Jen, Jen. And I'll have a link to all the notes there. So yeah, this is interesting. So, I mean, do you think when you look at it, I mean, I guess somebody could be listening to this show in 10 years from now. I mean, do you think there's a chance that this area, just from as it gets more notice from shows and things like that, that it'll be like some of these other areas, or what's stopping, that whole thing?
No, I think that this is going to be around for a very long time. And I think that because the Tabasco and Villahermosa, which is the little like area inside of Tabasco, the city, is very protective, and they're very specifically protective of this wilderness preserve. That's what it is. It's a natural preserve, and they're very protective of who fishes there, how they fish there. And so that's why this father and son are the only ones allowed to guide there. And they're only allowed to guide there because the dad, Paco Marroquin, and his son, Paco Marroquin Jr., have had it. They are like, if there's a TV fishing personality in Tabasco, it is them. He's had a TV show for about 10 years now. And so he is like the fishing celebrity. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So that's why he has a really good, close relationship with the government, and that's why they allow him to fish here.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, I'll try to find some links. Maybe there's some stuff out on YouTube or out online on some of the well, I guess it'll be in Spanish, but so thinking about this now, if I had a few weeks off and I just wanted to go down and, maybe I wanted to have half of it just go down into the local community and hang out and meet people, and then the other half was going to be a fishing sort of thing. Is that something where you could, I might be able to go down there and do that if I set something up with them in advance?
Absolutely. In fact, Tabasco is where the pepper, the Tabasco pepper, is actually grown for. It's not where Tabasco sauce is made, but it's where the pepper is grown. But on top of that, Tabasco is known for their chocolate. So that's where the cacao bean is. And so you can go see you can tour chocolate plants and plantations. You can go see the pepper fields. You can go to the museums. And then, not too far away is Punta Allen. So you could actually do a combined trip if you like bonefish and permit as well. You could fish in Tabasco for tarpon, and then it's not a very long drive to go to Punta Allen for your permit and your bonefish.
Gotcha.
On the flats.
And what is just a rough average on like a cost of something for, say, if you're down there for a few days or a week or something?
Yeah, sure. So I do trips all the time. They're like $2,500. That includes your housing. You're staying at a nice like Hilton or one of the I think it's a Hyatt. The Hyatt, you stay at the Hyatt. It includes all your food. It includes your guides' fees. It includes everything.
Gotcha.
And except for your airfare, obviously. Yep. So I'd say $2,500, $2,800 is where you're looking at.
Okay, there you go. Okay, cool. And so so it sounds like it's pretty straightforward getting down there. Are there any other things to know? I guess we could talk a little bit about the gear. What you need if you're going to go for tarpon. What is there a kind of the basics? Fly, rod, reel, line, leader stuff set up?
Yeah, I usually fish an 8-weight down there. You can bring a 10-weight. I bring in a 10-weight as well, but anywhere between 8 and 10 is good. Like I said, it's a juvenile tarpon fishery, but they have pulled out Sarah Thies from, she used to be in charge of the travel at Orvis. I brought her down, and she had only been fishing for a year, and she caught a 100-pound tarpon down there on a Clowser minnow. Yeah, on a Clowser minnow.
Wow.
So they eat anything that has a lot of flash on it. I have found the more flash, the better. So anything that's like an EP type minnow or a Clowser pattern. I personally like pink and white. Anything with lots of flash, you're gonna and eyes. I think eyes are important, especially in salt water. So I would put any kind of bait pattern in there, and you're gonna catch tarpon.
Okay, and like you said on the casting. I mean, it's important, but you don't have to cast a mile out there. It's just average size? What's a length of cast you're usually
Oh,
throwing?
seriously, these tarpon are rolling at, 15 feet from your boat. So you do not have to be a good angler at all in order to catch tarpon out there. And that's why I say this is the perfect place to take the intimidation out of tarpon fishing. So, and I personally am a fan of the Rio Flats Pro line. I love that line. But any saltwater line is going to work great. Anything that's there for warm water, you wouldn't want to use a trout line out there because, well, we all know that those lines just don't work well in warm water. But anything that's, for salt water would be perfect line for you. I like a floating line with the sinking fly. That gets it down just a little bit under the water, and that's where they seem to be cruising there. And you're going to throw up way up into the mangroves and strip back a slower strip, but keeping it moving. And they're coming out of it. There's just so many of them in there. You're going to be amazed. I mean, I don't know if you can tell, but I really love to fish I really love to fish Tabasco.
That's awesome. No, I've talked a little bit about tarpon. I've had mostly guests that I've asked occasionally, like, what is if you had to go with one species the rest of your life, and a lot of them say tarpon, and I imagine that's because of the feel. Could you describe what a tarpon of a larger size, or big fish you've caught before, feels like when they're on there?
Yeah, well, for me, I think a smaller tarpon is going to fight just like a large tarpon, right? There's still a tarpon. I think the thing that really gets anglers, and specifically people who love to fish for tarpon and who have fished for tarpon, is that, as many as you catch, you're going to lose, because they are a prehistoric fish. They've been around for a very long time. They're smart, right? And then they're just beautiful, that giant eye looking at you. But, they jump like crazy and they spit the hook. And so they really will test you. Yep. And I think, those of us who are avid fly anglers or who get obsessed by a fly, it's not because, it's so easy, and I love to cast, but I think it's the challenge. I can go out one day and feel like the best angler ever, and then the next day just get my butt kicked by this sport. And it's always something that you can learn and challenge yourself with. And tarpon are the ultimate species to test your skills on.
Nice. Okay, well, we'll come back to this here a little more as we get towards the end, but I did want to touch base a little bit on just thinking, well, one topic that we've touched on a little bit is kind of the women in fly fishing. Obviously, you have a magazine that's dedicated. Well, the 50-50 split on readership is pretty awesome, but at least you know a lot of women writers and stuff like that. What has been your take since you've been in? And what year did you start again fly fishing?
What year did I start fly fishing, or what? So I started about 12 years ago.
Okay, so you've been in it 12 years. So basically, you have that view, and you probably have a little history of before that. But what have you seen in changes in the kind of women and fly fishing movement over the years?
Huge changes. I would say the biggest changes have come in the last 4 years or so. And it's just an upward trend now, right? I think, when I first started out, I had to wear boys' waders. So I'm not very big. And so there were no women's waders out there. They just made regular waders. And if they did make women's waders, they took all the technicality out of them. They kind of did the whole women want to fish, but they just want to go along and sit on the beach, or on the side of the riverbank. They don't really want to fish, right? And so they made waders, but there was no technicality to them. Whereas now you can find waders, so many brands of waders out there made just for the woman angler, and we are built differently. And I feel for the manufacturing companies, because we come in all shapes and sizes, right? And we are so particular. It's a hard job out there to make waders and women's gear, but the manufacturers are doing it. And I would say in the last 5 years, I have seen a number of women-owned fly fishing-based companies come up and are now flourishing. You have Athena and Artemis, the women's fly shop. You have Sarabella Rods that makes women's rods. You have Angler, who makes women's gear. I mean, Fishyware, who makes all the leggings. I mean, and these are companies that were not around 5 years ago. So I've seen such a change. And even if you look at online presence, right? I mean, we could get into the whole debate about women in social media and all of that kind of stuff. But, when you look at that, I think that now women are really they're legitimate anglers. They are finally at the point where they are actually out there doing the sport that they love. And they're not saying, hey, look at me, I'm so great. They're saying, this is something I love and I'm proud of. and I think that the more women that get out there into the social media platform and, just show their love of fly, it encourages more women to get involved. And I think that's where the snowball effect is going on right now, where we see more women out there on social media that are catching fish and loving this and having a fun time on the water, which is just encouraging more women to get involved.
Yeah, that is great. That is great. Is there any, I mean, when you look at, I've been trying to get more women on the show, and I've had some really great guests, and we've got more coming. But, as I put together these programs, do you think I should be looking at my episodes, the way I put them together, any differently? Because I kind of have a little bit of a biased perspective. Or do you think I can just kind of do as I guess the way I do it is I kind of look for things that are interesting to me, and then I cover them. But are there tips if you're trying to reach, some of those, just to provide more value for other women out there?
Yeah, I think that women give a different perspective to the sport. And so things that might be interesting to you are not really, which might be more like the technical aspect of tarpon fishing or something like that. Mm-hmm. I'm just speaking, I'm just, giving something off the cuff. But I would say that women give a more experiential kind of bias to the sport. And so it doesn't have to be the biggest fish. It doesn't have to be the best fish. It can be an experience. And so I think that as long as you include women who are doing cool things in the industry, in your podcast, I think you're doing a great job. I think you're already reaching out to women. So, why change what's working at this point?
That's true. Yeah, things are probably not booming at quite the rate you are, but we're seeing we're definitely getting growth. And it's fun to reaching out to new people and getting great feedback. So it's pretty cool. So on that line, as far as the kind of the experience, you mentioned a story a little bit earlier about the girl and her father. Is there any other story that maybe a article or something that sticks out that you've had in the magazine over the years that really kind of something you remember or resonated?
Oh, sure. There's so many of them. I had one woman early on. She's a scientist, and she studies Midwest steelhead. And she wrote an article that we entitled Wild. And it was wild steelhead in the Midwest. So we're talking about an anadromous fish that come from the river system into Lake Michigan and then back into the rivers to spawn, just like they would out in the ocean. And she studies specifically the otolith. And I thought it was so interesting because she could show where that steelhead spent every single day of its life from the time it was an egg. So, every single day. And she could prove that these fish do not always go back to the same river to spawn. She calls them players. So there were steelhead that would be born in a river system, go out into Lake Michigan, spend its time in Lake Michigan, and then go into another river. Mm-hmm. And she also could prove that by the sediment that was in the rivers, why, for the most part, why they did not go back to the same river, be it water quality or, that kind of thing. I thought that was so fascinating because for so long I had only heard that, fish go into the same river to spawn, the river that they're born in, that's where they go. And so she could actually absolutely prove that they had not. And then, I think we've had so many interesting young girls write for us. And we just, in our last edition, we published an article called, Brook trout and blueberry pie. And it's by this young girl, and we call her Lil D to protect who she is. And she has been fishing with her dad forever. And she goes up into the Adirondacks and fishes out of her grandparents' cabin on these little teeny tiny rivers and catches fish. And she just legitimately loves to fish. And it was so neat because a lot of times we'll have parents who want their young girls to write for our magazine, but you can kind of tell that it's the parent who wants to write, and it's not really the child that wants to write. Yeah. But this little girl submitted all of the papers that she had handwritten for her story in our magazine. It was so inspiring, just these young girls that are out there.
That's
and then,
cool.
And I love to tell those stories. And then, we have a woman who's coming up with the story, and it was a fishing trip that she went on for her 70th birthday. And so we have the whole gamut, women of all ages, races, you name it. We have it. And that's what I love that, all those stories, the ones that I just really, really, resonate with who I am and what I want to put out there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, those are actually all those things you brought up different things, different questions I had. One of them just there, I've talked about this in the past, but I have a couple of small, girls that are amazing. They're 4 and 6 years old. And, I'm just excited about some amazing stuff, down the line. In fact, I think I'm going to stick a Dun magazine in my older girl. She's totally into fly tying and like, she's just going for it. So I think I'm going to stick a Dun magazine in there and let her know like what you're doing. And I think she's
oh my gosh,
excited. She's totally,
that'd be great.
Yeah. She's like, loves reading and stuff. So I think I'm going to do that. That's definitely one thing. But, I was kind of thinking just randomly, you mentioned keeping the identity safe. Do you think that's something that you kind of should worry about? I guess these days you always think about that stuff kind of, when you're putting your kids or things like that, photos and things like that with all the social media stuff. Do you ever think much about that?
Yeah, I have 3 daughters and 1 son. And so I guess maybe the mom in me is protective. And, when I was early on just learning to fish in Ann Arbor, I had never, I was from a small town in Wisconsin, and then I had lived in Chicago. And so going to Ann Arbor after living in Chicago for so many years, it never really occurred to me that being on the water would be a safety issue. I'd been around water my whole life, grew up around water, don't even remember learning to swim, that kind of thing. But one day I was fishing, and I was fishing right downtown Ann Arbor, and I was coming up upon the University of Michigan is right there. It's not like this is a secluded area. There was a viaduct, and I was fishing by myself, and it was a beautiful summer day. And before I knew it, there were like 3 or 4 homeless men that were just standing there watching me and catcalling to me as I was in the river. And it had never dawned on me that I would feel uncomfortable out there. But I think as a woman, there are different things that your safety is a different priority than I think maybe my counterpart male fly anglers have to worry about all the time. And so having daughters, I think I've always just been even more conscientious about it when I have a young writer that writes for us. I work very closely with the parents and make sure that they know exactly. And the parents are the ones that tell me how they want their daughter to be out there. But I always tell them, would you like, I'm a little hesitant to because they talk about where they're from, right? And they talk about where they fish and the rivers they fish on. And I just don't want to be any part of putting anyone in a compromising situation. So I do try to think about those kind of things, especially for our younger girls.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Okay. And, this is good. So I guess we can, just thinking, again, on the lines of, some of the stories, is there, when you look back at your life, you mentioned, when you first got into it, along the way, has there been a story that was kind of maybe a transition point where it kind of got you all in or made you go into the magazine, or maybe when you knew you were there, you were able to do it? I mean, because you mentioned you're all in on this, right?
Oh yeah, I'm all in. There's no backing out now. I think, it was only like from June to September, and we had our first magazine. And I think that early on, I realized this was something that people really were looking for. And I kind of thought that when I started it, I thought, well, if I was looking for a women's magazine, I'm sure other people were as well. And so I feel like because we had our first magazine so quickly, it was from June to September. Our first magazine came out in September. And then, it took the people that distribute to Barnes and Nobles and Books A Million, it took them no time at all to tell. In fact, it took such a little bit of time for them to accept the magazine at the bookstores that I actually said, do you think I could come in and talk to you? And because I was just like, this is kind of a scam, right? Because they said yes right away. And I was like, this can't be possible. And so a couple of my staff and I walked in and had this meeting with Ingram Distributing at the time and said, I said, do you accept everybody's magazine? And they looked at me like I had a third eye, and they were like, no. Why? And I said, well, because it didn't take you any time to say yes. And they were like, yeah, because this is something so new and fresh, And I thought, oh, okay. So there is a bigger, demographic out there that wants to see this. And, our editions, they sell out. I mean, I think we have maybe one edition that still has back order, back magazines that are available. And we are at the sellout point of a lot of our different editions, which is good. I love that people love the magazine. And so I think early on, I recognized that this was something that I was fully involved in. And to be real honest, I mean, why would you want to work in anything else?
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's right. No, it's definitely inspiring hearing your story because, you've obviously put in a lot of time and you have the passion and things like that, but, and you haven't done this your entire life, and, you jumped into it and you're leading, you're leading the way. It's pretty amazing.
I might be leading them in the wrong direction, but I am leading at some point, right?
Well, that was kind of another question I was thinking about. The Done magazine, I think you mentioned this before on other interviews and things, but it's kind of that safe place for, especially women to go and, read and kind of talk, at least I guess probably through the website. Are there other places, that are kind of safe places where women can go and talk to other women about fly fishing where they don't have to worry about, kind of any of that other stuff that might happen?
Yeah. Well, I think that you interviewed Heather Hodson, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And I mean, I love Heather. She is one of the most genuine people. And we did this cross-country road trip last summer where we spent 19 days in the car together. And so I can vouch for her and for everything that she does. Her United Women on the Fly, I would say, is one of the best groups that are out there. Mm-hmm. I just really love what she's done and the networking that she does. I mean, you can go onto her website and find a woman, say I'm going to go to Utah and fish, and you can go to her website, look at Utah and find a woman to fish with. That's or sweet. Someone that will fish with out there. Yeah. And that's been really cool. I mean, we do that as a magazine as well. We have people write into us all the time and say, hey, I'm going to go travel here. Do you know anybody? And we connect people. But Heather is really a genius at that. And so I think United Women on the Fly really, apart from our magazine, has done an excellent job at, making women feel safe and giving them a sounding board to be able to tell their stories as well.
Nice, cool. And now, are you guys doing another road trip this year?
We are. In fact, we are at the Fly Fishing Show. I'm in charge of the women's showcases at Denver and in Edison and then in Atlanta. And we are showing our film that we made on our first road trip. And in Denver, in a couple weeks, we are announcing where our next road trip is going to be. So I can't tell you where it is yet, but I can say that it's going to be a lot of fun, and it will be starting at the end of September, beginning of October.
Nice. End of September. Okay. It's beginning. So this has got to be, well, I'm just going to make a guess. It's going to have the Skeena Basin included in it, maybe, but. Okay. Well, this will be awesome. I'll provide links out to that as well in the show.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So, when you think about it, I mean, I know you guys did your first trip. It was kind of it was really cool because you didn't, try to do it on the DIY sort of thing. Are you going to do the same thing? And do you have any tips for people that maybe want to go across country and do some things where, they maybe don't want to spend a ton of money, but they want to hit some cool areas?
Right. So that's exactly what we did, right? So Heather and I are both on a trout bum budget. Neither of us are individually wealthy in any means. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but publishing a magazine, I mean, that's not a small endeavor. It costs a lot of money. So, where we can save money is where we really wanted to, both of us. And I think that, I don't like the fact that people say that fly fishing is so expensive and you have to be like the elite of the elite to do it. There are a lot of ways to be able to do it yourself in fly fishing and save money. And so we couch surfed, and that's where the whole thing with like the networking that is available out there already in a social media platform or through United Women on the Fly or Done Magazine, we were able to throw a fleece out there and say, hey, we're going to be this is where our road trip is going to take us. We're looking for people who want to fish with us, guides who might want to take us out, people where we can just sleep on a couch. And so that's what we did. And there were, we had so many people that just came forward and said, I don't have a big house, but I'd be happy to let you sleep on my couch. And so we did that. We've slept on floors. We one day, the people that we were going to stay with in Ennis, Montana, it just didn't work out at the last second because our event ran over for so late. And so we ended up meeting somebody at the guide bar there in Ennis, Montana. And he was like, hey, I have a house. Would you guys like to stay there? And so we did. Now, would I suggest that to every person out there? No, but people knew exactly where we were going to be at every time. And so we felt safe doing that with this person. It turned out beautifully. And so we're going to do the same thing because, we went to fly shops, and what we would do is we would throw these big women's events, and we would say to the women, like, for instance, we started out in Nashville at Fly South and said, we had a big event where women came in and we taught them about, the anatomy of a fish and how to keep them wet, and talked about what we were doing, and a chance for women to meet up with other women and men too, And then at the end, we just said, hey, we're going to pass around a fly box, and we're going to look for people to give us, if you feel like you want to give us cash to get to our next destination for gas money, we'd love that. And do you know that from Fly South to our next shop in the Driftless area of Wisconsin, in Viroqua, Wisconsin, we had to the dollar, we were $1 over our gas from one place to the other of what we raised. And it just went like that from one place to the next. And so we used the community of fly anglers to get us from place to place to place. And it was really neat to see this huge network of women and men come together, and manufacturers who supported us along our way, including Nissan, who gave us a truck to drive.
No kidding.
I mean, it's just like crazy stuff that's out there. All you have to do is just ask, right? There's so many people who want to teach other women and get involved in fly fishing or help you along the way. That's what I love about this sport. It's just, water seeks its own level, and the people that are in fly fishing are just good people.
Yeah. No, that's great to hear those stories. And I think that's the cool time we live in with the social media, even the person that, isn't really involved in the industry sort of stuff can probably just reach out to, the local, whatever Facebook group or something, or fly shop in that area and connect with some people and do the same thing that you guys did.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
Which is really nice. Okay. And well, I guess we've covered quite a bit here. I definitely have a few more questions I want to ask you before we get into a little rapid fire round here at the end. But before, one thing I always ask is, I guess I call it the 222, and it's, we're thinking of Tarpon, your top 2 flies, top 2 tips, and top 2 resources that help somebody learn about to get ready for a trip. So do you have because you mentioned some flies, but if you had to pick 2 flies that you would use?
A Clowser minnow and an AP minnow.
Okay. And how about, is there a tip, either a tarpon tip or just a general fly fishing tip that might help, a couple of tips maybe that might help somebody who's going out there for the first time?
Sure. In saltwater, I would say that you always want to keep the fly moving. It's not like you're fishing for bass and in freshwater where if you pause and then you strip again, that predator will go and get it. In saltwater, if you stop your fly, that's an unnatural presentation and you will probably turn the fish off. So I would say you always want to keep your fly moving. I would also say something that I mentioned earlier, especially when fishing for tarpon in Tabasco, a floating line with a sinking fly works perfect. It puts it right in the right water column. Okay,
perfect. And then are there a couple of maybe resources, maybe a book, I don't know, other magazine, online resource that you would recommend somebody if they wanted to get a little more information on getting ready for a trip down there?
Sure. I would go to Fish Tobasco. I think that they have everything that you might want and need to use. That resource is excellent. Obviously, there's a good video on YouTube as well. If you just go to Fly Fishing Tabasco or you Google Fly Fishing Tabasco, you'll find a bunch of resources. Those are great. We also have some blog posts and articles on our own website at dunmagazine.com.
Okay. And so with the blog post at the Dun Magazine, so you have the magazine that goes out, but you actually have content you're putting out there on a regular basis on the site?
Yeah, we have a very, very exhaustive site.
Nice.
Yep. So It's not just stuff that's in the magazine. I mean, we do things like the 12 do's and don'ts of going into a fly shop, or very basic things like how to put your fly rod together. There was a point in my fly fishing career when I'd been in fly fishing maybe 3 or 4 years, 3 or 4 years, and you'd walk into a fly shop that you've been going to for a very long time, and it gets to the point where people just assume you know things that you should have been taught, but no one ever taught you, and you feel embarrassed then to ask the question or to tell them that you don't know those things. So, I mean, I knew that I got to a point in my life where I was embarrassed to ask things that people assumed I knew. So that's why we do a very basic page with questions, teaching people things that a lot of anglers might think are very redundant or, oh, they should just know that. But not everybody does. So, how to get fly line twist out of your line, things like that. You can find everything from education to conservation to basics to in-depth feature articles on our website as well.
Cool. Okay. And what is the best time if you're heading down there to hit the tarpon?
Sure. So I would say anytime. I love to go anytime between October and May is my favorite. Otherwise, it's just so hot.
Oh, yeah. Right. It's just,
the tarpon are always there and it's good fishing all the time. There's the dry season and then there's the wet season, but it's always the hot season. So instead of going to the hotter season, I like to go to the hot season.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. And
Uh-huh.
so this is kind of a little deeper question, but when you look back, if you kind of go 100 years out and, people are looking back on this time 100 years from now, is there something you would want to be remembered for in kind of the fly fishing world and the stuff you're doing or you will be doing?
Yeah, I would love to, apart from, being known for the magazine, I would really love for people to look back and say, wow, she really did a lot to get people involved in the sport of fly fishing, and she really helped grow the sport. That's what I'd like to be known for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to talk to. I've been doing it quite a while, and I was kind of there when the river runs through it. We've talked about that on the show before. The big boost there, but it seems like there's been another boost, and I actually had just Elliott Adler on a past episode from the Drake magazine talked about Tom Bai. And mentioned how Tom was involved in the kind of this change or recent change. I guess this might have been 12 years ago now or something, but where fly fishing kind of made a jump to this worldwide thing where we're all of a sudden we're talking about tarpon now, right? It doesn't seem like we were talking about that a lot. So it's made this big jump, and now it's made this jump in with women. I mean, what do you think is the next jump? Do you think we're going to continue growing and more people are going to have opportunities to get involved?
Oh, absolutely. I don't know why, fly fishing can't be the next yoga and isn't already poised to be the next yoga that's out there where you can do it with your family and you can do it with your children. And I do think that children and minorities, we need more diversity in our sport. And I would love to see organizations like Richie Jones's African American Fly Fishing take off. Because I just think that, in order for our sport to survive, we always think, oh, we're the elite in the sport, but really we're like, what are we, 8% of all the fishing in the world? Yeah. And so if we could just make a crossover and, I find that fly anglers tend to be very exclusive. Like we're like, oh, no, I'm not going to fish any other way. But, whereas conventional anglers tend to be very inclusive, and they're like, well, heck, if a fly rod is a better way to catch fish, I'm just going to use it. It doesn't matter to me as long as it's a better way. And so I would say that we're going to grow in by opening ourselves up to people who fish already but don't fish with a fly rod, to children and to minorities. I would love to see those three grow. That's the way that we're going to keep fly fishing growing at this time.
Yeah. How do you find those new people that maybe have no idea about fly fishing?
So we do a lot of sports shows, and we do specifically one in the Chicagoland area. It's the Chicagoland Fishing, Travel, and Outdoor Sports Show, and we do the Saltwater Show, and they are not fly fishing shows, but the guy, Todd Alberto, who is the show manager, has a real heart for fishing and he likes to fly. He likes fly fishing, even though he's not an avid fly angler. And he gives us our own casting pond just so that we can put a fly rod in the hands of conventional anglers all weekend long. And I'm telling you, the show in Chicago sees 40,000 plus people a weekend, and we teach 1,000 people easily.
No kidding.
We put a fly rod in the hand of 1,000 people easily. On Sundays, he makes casting a fly rod part of the children's scavenger hunt. And so we put a fly rod in the hands of so many children on Sunday alone that by the end, I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I'm going to sleep for the next 3 weeks. Yeah. That's how we do it. We go to the shows that are not fly shows. Gotcha. Everybody that comes to a fly show has either an interest in it already or has tried it or is an avid fly angler. But if you say to you go to these shows that are all conventional fishing, and you get the guy who's got the kid along to try it, and then the kid makes a nice cast, then before you know it, the dad's up there before you know it, they're going, oh my gosh, this is so much easier than I thought it was. I need to buy the fly rod. And they look at what the fly rod is, and I can't tell you how many times they've gotten down off the stage and then come back to me and said, is this the one? They got the sight up. They got the Orvis sight up or the St. Croix sight up, and they're saying, is this the rod I just used? And I'll say, yeah. And they're like, okay. And they put it in their cart and they buy it right then.
There you go. Wow.
It's, and you have a new angler. That's just how it works.
That's cool. And so you're seeing, you've been doing this a while, going to the non-fly fishing shows?
Yeah, I'd say probably 5 years.
Okay. And so it sounds like have you seen a little bit of growth there in the, I've noticed just at ours, I'm out here in Portland, and I think we've talked about it before that we have a show that's just it's an all fishing outdoor show. And it seems like over the years, it's actually the fly fishing area has kind of shrunk. And I think, I'm not sure if that's partly to do with the ownership or whatever, but it's just, you just see it shrinking and, good or bad, but, for fly fishing, it just seems like there was more of a footprint there. But you see the opposite? Do you see it kind of growing?
So interestingly, I see the manufacturers coming to the shows shrinking, but I see the number of people who attend and pick up a fly rod and want to start fly fishing growing. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's part of what I was saying before about the exclusivity that is fly fishing. They're kind of like, they don't see the value in the bait, the bait chunkers or the worm dunkers, as they call them. And, to be real honest, I didn't either. I kind of was like, oh, that's the dark side. But then I moved to Tennessee and I live right next to Kentucky Lake where the professional bass tournaments are all held. And I'm telling you, I did a 180. When I look at these conventional anglers out there who I used to look down on because I was like, oh, they're just using bait. That's so easy, right? Yeah. But if you ask a fly angler where the bass are going to be when the water temperature is dropped to 58 degrees and the wind is out of the northwest and the waves are at, 1 foot, where the bass are going to be in, let's say, November, they can tell you exactly where they're going to be. I mean, the conventional anglers, you ask them that, they can tell you exactly where that bass is going to be. But if you ask a fly angler, well, when the water's 58 degrees and it's, it's a 1 foot waves and the wind is coming out of the northwest and it's November, where are the bass going to be? They're going to say, well, I'm just going to cast my fly up towards the shore and pull it back, Yeah. So, we're not, at least in a lot of fishing, and, a lot of people think fly fishing is only for trout, but really I learned on bass, so bass is my thing. And, I find that the conventional anglers are very sophisticated. We do not give them enough credit as fly anglers. And I think that once you make that change in your thought process, you can actually approach conventional anglers knowing that they already know where the bass live, how the bass eat, what the bass eat. And then it's just, you're just offering them another tool in their box to catch fish that they already love to fish. And then you've made a fly angler, angler.
Right. Yeah. And I was just thinking Kelly Gallup, I had him on in episode 52, and he touched on the same thing. He noted that he's got a bunch of people, bass gear fishermen and stuff that he just loves. In fact, a lot of his, the streamer stuff that he came up with was based on some of the bass guys and the gear they use. So it makes sense that we can learn a lot from those guys, from everybody. It's just fishing.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Yeah. That's good stuff. Okay. Well, let's see. I guess I was kind of thinking about, again, going back to, I guess, one more time back to the magazine, and, you kind of got to a point where I guess you went all in on it. Can you take us to that moment where you knew this thing was, it was going to be, you were going to be able to go all in on it, or when you jumped?
Yeah. So I, it was only digital for a very long time. And as a digital magazine back in 2013, everyone was saying that print was dead and digital was the only way to go. And so, I actually had my ad sales when we were a new magazine. So to buy an ad in our magazine at that time was like $100, $100 and you can have a full page ad in our digital magazine. Mm-hmm. And I just could not sell an ad to save my life. And then, it got to the point where people just really, really loved our magazine, and it's the word of mouth started getting out there and getting out there and getting out there. And I thought, you know what? It's all about perceived value in this market. It really is, maybe the way that the game is played is that, well, I'm just trying to be nice to our advertisers and get our name out there, but they already know who we are. And maybe by having an ad that's only $100, they're saying, oh, it must not be that big of a deal. And so then maybe this is the businesswoman in me. Mm-hmm. I jumped our ad prices by 10 times. And then I could not keep people away from our digital magazine. People were trying to get in, clamoring to get into our advertising, right? Yeah.
You 10x, so you went up to 1,000, and it was perceived value. It was like people were knocking on your door.
Because then all of a sudden people realized that what I thought I had was valuable, and that the people that read it knew it was valuable. And so then it must be valuable. And at this point now, we have the statistics to back all of our stuff. But at the beginning of it, I think it took me realizing that what I was saying and what my team was actually putting out there was valuable, and believing it myself. And I remember that day when I got the call from Orvis and they said, Jen, We want to advertise in your magazine. And I thought, oh my God, we have finally done it. Yes, finally, because I used to think that Orvis was just a dog bed company and not really a legitimate, fly company. Like, they sell, vests and barber jackets and dog beds. But then, the people at Orvis, they reached out, Steve Hempkins and, the Perkins brothers, they reached out and said to a group of us women, we want to do this, we want to know exactly what the woman fly angler wants. And I thought, to be real honest, when they asked me down there, I went with a bad attitude because I'd been asked this before and I'd given all this time and all this information and no one ever did anything about it. Mm-hmm. And so I just felt like it was going to be a waste of time. And they did such a good job at picking the brains of, I think it was like maybe 20 women, 25 women. What do you want? And then not only did they do that and spend 2 days with us, but they actually put into place new gear, new media, new stuff. And then they threw money at the Only Women's Fly Fishing magazine. And that to me, not just because it was my magazine, but it said to a lot of women out there, you know what? They're putting their money where their mouth is. They really do believe in the female angler. And at that point, I was just like, wow. Okay. Yeah. Finally, women are making a place for themselves in this marketplace. And if I can have any small, tiny little part of that, I want in. And that's when, I really did like this 180. And then from that point forward, and then once you have a print magazine and people are like buying subscriptions where you have to produce the next magazine because they've already paid for it. Well, guess what? You're all in.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, no going back there. And how many times does it come out per year?
It comes out 4 times a year.
Okay, 4 times. Yeah, so that's pretty good, and that's pretty common. I guess a lot of the magazines. I think the Drake does that as well, and Fly Fish Journal. So
yeah, and it's a huge magazine. I know you've seen it. It's 140 plus pages, and it's oversized. I mean, it is substantial. So I would kill myself, I think, if I tried coming out with it 6 times a year.
yeah, right. No, this is great. Okay, well, you ready for a quick little rapid fire round?
Sure.
Okay. So maybe you could just start us off with a little bit on, I guess the most common question you get as far as fly fishing.
Most common question: do you really fish?
Really?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question.
Yeah. Do you catch those fish yourself?
And that's coming from just kind of people that are just kind of curious.
Yeah, they are. And you know what? It is funny because I guess people, you don't have to be a model to be the editor-in-chief of Vogue, right? So, and I always say I'm not a professional angler. I'm the editor of a fly fishing magazine. I love it, but that doesn't mean that I'm an expert angler, right? Yeah, so, yes, I do fish. I love to fish. That's what got me involved in this.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, and do you have a go-to piece of gear that, when you're out there traveling, or it doesn't have to be necessarily fly fishing, but maybe on your road trip, something that you won't leave without?
Yeah, I won't travel without my Panga. My Yeti Panga. I love that thing. I pack all of my clothes in it. I wish it had wheels on it, but man, that thing is indestructible. And when you're traveling, like I'll be in Argentina in January, I'm going to pack my clothes in that thing. That thing is indestructible.
Oh, cool. And this is like a travel suitcase?
Yeah. Well, it's like a big duffel that's also a backpack. It's really well made, and it's made by Yeti.
Gotcha.
And it, seriously, you can pack everything in there. It's waterproof. I mean, it's fantastic.
Cool. Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes for that as well. I'm not sponsored by Yeti, but I love providing. That's why that question is great, because I think it provides some value for people that want to get some good gear, and that's cool. What do you think is? Do you have a favorite type of music you like to listen to?
I'm country. I live outside of Nashville, so I love country.
Yeah, and is it country? Like I've talked a little bit about this before. Oh, actually, it was Heather. It was funny. I think we were talking about. I'm not sure if it was Austin or what we were talking about, but she mentioned how, because I love country as well, but I'm more of a like Johnny Cash, old school, Merle Haggard type country. I never really got into the newer country. But is there a newer country scene going on out there?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, my favorite artist is Casey Musgraves. I think she's the best at the moment.
Okay. All right. Perfect. And what about your kind of go-to beverage at the end of the day after a day of fishing?
I'm a Scotch drinker, a single malt Scotch.
All right. Nice. Let's see here. What else do we have for you? I think we're getting pretty close there. I just had a couple of notes I was going to touch base on as far as casting, because I get these questions quite frequently, but it sounds like, you do some instruction. Do you kind of get into the casting instruction stuff a lot?
Yep, I do. I'm on the board of the FFI. but I am not a certified casting instructor.
Yep. Gotcha. Yeah.
But I don't think that you have to be. You know, I tell people all the time, you know, I think a lot of women and men are afraid to teach someone because they don't think that they're good enough. But listen, you only have to be better than the person you're teaching to give them a few pointers. And we can always recognize the tick in someone else's cast before we can recognize it in ourselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. Mm-hmm. Do you have one thing, this might not come to you right away, but one thing you want to share that maybe nobody knows about you yet?
Nobody knows about me yet. I used to be a pastor's wife. Does that count?
Wow. No kidding.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. How now, maybe you could take us down there just for a sec. Is that, was that a pretty, I guess a little different, or was that just a fairly normal way of life?
No, I mean, it was a different type of life. I got married really young. And in fact, my ex-husband is still a pastor. But yeah, I was a pastor's wife. No one would ever know that about me right now because the big joke is that I didn't start drinking until I was 38 and I haven't stopped yet.
Nice. That's cool. Good stuff. All right. Well, yeah, Jen, this is, I think that's about all I have for you. I just wanted to, before I let you go, see if you can, in the next 6 to 12 months, if there's anything, I guess you have the road trip coming up. Is there anything else you want to note with the magazine or anything else you have going on?
Yeah, so I'm doing a trip to Argentina, hosting it through Orvis. That's in January. I'll be at all of the fly fishing shows in Denver, Edison, and Atlanta, where we're going to have women's showcases, which are really a lot of fun. Heather and I are doing the road trip again, and we are also planning a woman's trip to Calgary.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, that'll be in August. It'll be a lot of fun.
You're packing it in. That's so cool.
Yep.
All right. Well, and if people want to find you, they can just go to, I guess, dunmagazine.com is the best place.
Yep, that's the best place.
All right. And okay, Heather. I was just thinking about Heather Hodson.
All right.
I was thinking about Heather Hodson because I was thinking about her. I was doing the same question with Heather, and she was telling me about. I didn't realize she was a nurse.
Oh yeah.
And
she's incredible.
Totally. And we got in this whole thing we went deep into like kind of death, right? Like she deals with people that are dying, and it was it was intense. And that was just popping in my head because you are not. I mean, fly fishing is your world. I mean, is your full time income.
Yeah, it is.
Which is amazing because a lot of people I talk to on here are kind of half of them. In fact, half of them say I say this probably too much, but there's no money to be made. There's not enough money to be made in fly fishing. So I love hearing these stories, like talking to you when you've actually done it.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to make $10 million this next year, but you know what? I'll make enough to feed myself and pay my mortgage.
That's for sure.
And put out a good magazine, and do something that I absolutely love and makes me happy. And I think that when you do that, I've told my children over and over and over, when you do something that makes you happy, the money will follow, right?
Yep.
It's true.
I agree. That's the thing. Mm-hmm. I'm going to tell my girls as well. And we're going to talk a little more about the Dun magazine over Christmas. So Jen, appreciate you coming on and thanks for spending the time.
Thank you so much. Take care.
All right. See ya.
So there you go. If you want to find all the show notes with all the links we cover, just go to wetflyswing.com/60. And another shout out to our patrons over at wetflyswing.com/Patreon, Patreon, where $1 will get you started. It would be super amazing if you can leave a comment on the blog at wetflyswing.com/60 and let me know what you think of the show. And one last little nugget, an easy way to subscribe to the show is to text FWS, that's for Wet Fly Swing, to 31996. And just one click on the text, it'll get you started. Thanks again, and looking forward to catching up with you soon, and hope to maybe see you online or on the river.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.